Humans have been performing burial ceremonies for thousands of years. Burial ceremonies actually predate Homo sapiens and date all the way back to Neanderthals. New evidence is constantly being unearthed regarding ancient burial practices. For example, recent evidence indicates that Stonehenge was used as a burial site. Historically, body disposal has taken many forms, including placing the body in a tomb, burying it underground, burying it at sea, cremating the body, embalming or mummifying the body, displaying the body as a trophy, completely destroying the body, and even ingesting the body. Burial has been used for various purposes throughout history, including to ward off vengeful spirits and as a form of disease control. However, the most common purpose across cultures is the social aspect of dying, in which the living help the deceased transition into their new form, whether that be a new reincarnation, a socially active spirit, or simply a memory. Burials depend largely on culture and/or religion. We are going to cover 5 cultures and religions and their burial ceremonies. Hindu death and rituals. Unlike most other religions, Hinduism does not have a single founder nor a core doctrine. Hinduism is like several religions combined in one and is described as more a way of life than a form of thought. Hinduism dates back 5,000 years and originated in India. It is one of the world's most practiced religions. Hindus believe in multiple gods and one supreme God who is the creator of all things. Their most revered texts are the Vedas, which is the world's most ancient scripture, and the Agamas. Hindus believe in reincarnation of the soul into other forms or bodies after death, until the soul has reached moksha, which is enlightenment. Hindus believe people create their own destinies through karma, which they describe as a universal law of cause and effect based on thoughts, words, and actions. Hindus practice non-injury, which is called ahimsa, because they believe all life is sacred and should be loved. Hindus respect all religions and do not think any religion is superior. Hindus believe life is divided into 4 stages and have specific rites and rituals for each stage of life, including death. Hindus believe in a distinction between the body and the Atman, or soul. They believe the soul goes to another body after death, like changing clothes, and therefore believe the body serves no purpose after death. Hindus believe a person can have a good or bad death. A good death has 3 qualities. First, close relatives of the person are prepared for the death. Second, the person has not suffered any trauma. Third, their friends and family have been able to say their goodbyes. Sudden or traumatic deaths cause a great deal of anxiety for the person's family and friends, as these are considered bad deaths. Age is another important factor in determining how a death is handled. Hindus believe a person who lives to be 90 or 100 years old has completed all 4 of the stages of life, and festivities are held to celebrate their life and death. During the dying process, the family plays a significant role. Family makes most of the decisions. They pray with the dying person to help them transition into their new reincarnation. They help them focus their thoughts on God to help them have a better reincarnation. They often donate money to a charity on behalf of the dying person to help boost their karma. They might also put drops of Ganges water in the dying person's mouth. The family also typically respects the wishes of the dying person, even if that means watching their loved one suffer. After death, a basil leaf, clarified butter, and a piece of gold are placed in the mouth of the deceased person. The body is washed by the eldest son and covered in red clothing for married women and white for others. It is against the Hindu religion to put the deceased in a covered box or container, so an open casket or cardboard box is used. Disposal of the body can occur via cremation, burial, or even leaving the body in the Ganges River. However, cremation is the preferred method. The eldest son and close male relatives carry the body to the cremation site. If a hearse is used, family accompany it and chant. A Hindu priest conducts last rites and prayers before the body is incinerated. The family is expected to cry and wail loudly. This is considered healthy. According to a 2011 study by Rashmi Gupta, it is important for nurses to assess the level of acculturation and adherence to traditional Hindu practices to determine how best to help the family and patient prepare for death. The nurse should assess the need for and ability of a Hindu priest and temple. The nurse should recognize that rituals and practices help relieve the anxiety of the dying patient and their families.
Islamic death and rituals. Before dying, Muslims must always be prepared to die. Funeral and burial arrangements are made ahead of time. Muslims believe the spirit is eternal and does not perish when the individual passes away. The dying individual's body is placed on their back with the soles of their feet facing Mecca. Mecca is the holiest city in the Islam religion. It also holds a sacred mosque. It's also in Saudi Arabia near the Red Sea. Elders pray from the Quran and recite scriptures. The patient recites scriptures while dying. Muslims must wash before praying. The patient asks Allah for forgiveness. Drops of blessed water is placed in the patient's mouth by an elder. Guests should not take photos or use recording devices. Immediately after death, the deceased eyes and jaw are closed. Body must be buried as soon as possible. Ritual washings of the body, ghusl, is done by the same sex as the deceased. The washing is to be done at least 3 times. If more washings need to be done, it has to be an uneven number. A woman's hair is washed and braided into 3 braids. Washers are not to display their grief. Body washed in this exact order: upper right side, upper left side, lower right side, lower left side. Placement of the body in the sheets. You place 3 large white sheets on top of each other. The body is to be placed in the sheets. The deceased left hand is placed on his or her chest, then the right hand is placed on the left hand, mimicking a prayer position. Sheets are folded over the body, first the right side, then the left side. This is done until all 3 sheets have wrapped the body. The shrouding should be secured by ropes, 1 tied above the head, 2 tied around the body, 1 tied below the feet, and then transported to the mouth. If a death occurs during the day, the body is prepared and then sent to the mosque as soon as possible. If the death occurs at night, the lights are left on or the candles burning. The Quran is located next to the deceased to protect and bless the individual. Nursing considerations. The RN needs to support the spiritual needs of the patient. Removal or covering of non-Islamic religious symbols. Help patient lay on his or her back so the soles of the feet are facing Mecca. Make sure the nurse is the same sex as the individual. Make sure no one from the opposite sex touches the individual. Double check all funeral and burial arrangements are made in advance. Know which mosque the body needs to be transported to after the death. Give the family and friends plenty of mourning time. Muslims believe the deceased can hear and understand what is being said. They are not always aware they are in transition. Be aware of who is going to be the informer. One relative will inform the deceased patient they have passed away and give instructions of what will happen, questions that will be asked, and the correct answers so they will be prepared when the 2 angels appear to them at the grave.
In this section of the presentation, we will be focusing on burial rituals of the American Indian. We will be focusing specifically on the traditional and Christian Navajo beliefs regarding death, burial practices, and nursing considerations. Native Americans believe in order for a dying person to pass to the spirit world, strict death and burial practices must be complete. They believe if these strict practices are not adhered to, the spirit of the dead will return to haunt the living. It is believed to be taboo to discuss death, dying, and the dead. During traditional deaths, the medicine man and family would stay with the dying person until death is imminent. At this point, 1 to 2 close relatives will stay until the transition is complete. This is due to the risk of being exposed to evil spirits. After death, the deceased's body is prepared and buried in the finest clothes with their most precious possessions. If this is not followed, it is believed that their spirit will return to this earth in search of their belongings, and it will be bad luck upon the family. Following this practice is also a sign of respect to show how loved the deceased was by the family. In the traditional setting, the grave is unmarked and secret to prevent grave robbers from upsetting the dead. The body is buried by men of the clan, and these men stay away from the family for 4 days. The deceased's horse is also killed and buried. It is believed the spirit will ride the horse into the afterlife. It is also believed that it takes 4 days for the spirit to reach the afterlife, and mourning takes place during these 4 days. In today's society, there is a large population of Christians among the Navajo American population, so modern burial practices have a large Christian influence. Christian Navajo burials are planned through the church. In some cases, there is a viewing of the body before burial. The graves are marked and visited frequently. This would have been taboo with traditional burial practices. Discussing dying, death, and the deceased is known to be taboo in Native American culture. This must be taken into consideration when providing nursing care. Individual beliefs and values must be assessed so appropriate care may be provided while remaining within the nursing scope of practice and adhering to standards of care. A rapport and connection must be developed between the nurse and Native American patient to adequately assess the patient's needs, their perceptions, and spiritual beliefs in regards to death and dying. Establishing who will be involved in the patient's care and who has access to what medical information is also something that is important and needs to be discussed. A culturally competent nurse will be able to redirect the thinking from the negative taboo of death and dying over to improving the quality of life for the patient during the remaining days on this earth.
Catholic death and rituals.
Catholics believe in death as the entrance into eternity. They believe the dead is the passing from the physical world to the afterlife, where the deceased souls will live in heaven, hell, or purgatory. When death is approaching, a priest should be brought in to administer the light rites and the Holy Communion to the dying person. At this time, the priest will also pray with the family that is present. So what happens after someone passes? There are several things that can happen. The first one is the vigil service. The vigil is a prayer service usually held the evening before the funeral. Much like a viewing or a wake, family and friends gather in the home of the deceased, in the funeral home or in the church to pray and remember the deceased. The second phase is the funeral mass. This happens prior to the burial to pray specific prayers for the dead, with either the body or cremated remains present. If the body is not present, then the service is referred to as the memorial mass. And the third one is the grave service, or the rite of committal. This happens after the funeral mass with a priest present for final prayers, service with burial of the body or cremated remains, or the placing of the remains in the columbarium. Flowers are placed on the casket by family and friends. Once someone passes, they can either be cremated or have a burial service. Body burial is the most common. After the service, the remains are usually transported to the cemetery, where there is a formal burial ceremony presided over by the priest. Cremation, on the other hand, is now acceptable. Historically, the Catholic Church forbade cremation. However, in the early 1960s, the Church relaxed the rules and today many Catholics choose cremation. Most recently, the Church clarified its position on cremation for Catholics, and in October of 2016, the Pope issued updated guidelines. Today, cremation is allowed, but the ashes must be kept in a sacred place, such as the church cemetery. Ashes should not be scattered or kept in an urn at home. When it comes to organ donation, there has been some disagreement. Though there is some disagreement with the Catholic Church on the acceptability of organ donation, many Catholic leaders have accepted the medical definition of brain death, which is the end of brain function as the end of life, and see organ donation as the final shareable act, the one we make. As nurses, we should be aware of the different, not only religious, but cultural rituals and beliefs when it comes to death. Some of the nursing's considerations are arrange for priests to provide the last rites, the Holy Communion, and prayers. Also, discuss organ donation in advance. And last, allow the family to pray in the room for the dying individual. Give them some privacy and let them be at peace with their deceased family member.
Buddhist death and rituals.
Buddhists are taught that all beings experience the continual cycle of rebirths, known as samsara, and the suffering, dukkha, that follows. The form of rebirth a person experiences is influenced by the law of karma, which is the natural consequences of their action. The state of a person's mind at the time of death and the karmic merit they have earned will determine the type of rebirth they will experience. After Buddha reached the state of awakeness, which is nirvana, he began to share his teaching, Dharma, on how to reach nirvana and attain freedom from samsara. During the process of dying, the room must be kept clean, quiet, and peaceful to help the dying individual keep his mind clear during his transition. The Buddhist practice of meditating during the process of dying is significant. Family, friends, and a teacher will verbally reflect on the power of good deeds and their effect on the next incarnation, as well as chanting prayers to help the individual transition in harmony. Nurses should be respectful during this process by turning off the monitors, dimming the lights, and limiting traffic by staff in and out of the room. After death, Buddhists believe that the soul does not leave the body. A body should not be moved or touched up until the body is cold, which could be up to 8 hours. The body then can be covered with a white sheet and transported to the morgue in silence. If possible, nurses should make appropriate arrangements in advance to honor this practice. Organ donation is acceptable. A representative should discuss this option in advance. Embalming and cremation are also acceptable. Services will be held on the 3rd, 7th, 49th, and 100th day after death. Services should be simple, solemn, and dignified, the body dressed in modest clothing. An altar with an image of the individual, Buddha, candles, and a fruit will be displayed. Mourners will wear white. Chanting for practical reasons will take place at this time. The morning of the burial or cremation, monks should be invited to perform the last rite and chant until the body is buried or cremated. Other nursing considerations would be to discuss the complex issue of the life-threatening disease without providing false hope. A nurse should discuss analgesia and sedation wishes in advance with the patient, family, and possibly a religious teacher, as the patient may refuse these medications to keep his mind clear. A nurse should also check the hospital policy and make appropriate arrangements so the body is not touched or moved until 2 hours after it's cold.
Human culture embraces a rich mosaic of different ways to immortalize the passing of life. However, one underlying commonality seems to transcend all cultures. That commonality is that death and spirituality are inextricably bonded within our shared human consciousness. Throughout history, religious practices have provided guidance during the transition from life to death. One cannot ignore the commonality across cultures and religious beliefs. There is a sense of peace and beauty in the well-orchestrated balance between fulfilling religious obligation while offering support to mourners of the deceased.